A campus radio station could soon go off the air. University of Waterloo's 100.3 Sound FM is fighting to stay alive. CTV's Nicole Lampa has this for us tonight. Nicole, why is the station struggling?
Bottom line, Janine, money. It barely has enough cash right now to keep going, but that could change depending on a student referendum.
You want to reach as many people as you can possibly reach at any given time.
Naturally, so do you.
No. I want to reach the people who would say want to listen to radio dramas, who are interested in this other program or this, that, and the other.
I hope that you never get a license.
All right.
Because of that very statement. Because why should you have a license and tie up a frequency of any nature? I don't care whether it's AM, FM, or something new that they're going to dream up. Laser. If you're not going to utilize that frequency to its utmost.
Well, I had been in radio through high school in North Bay, and so I guess I started when I was about 14 years old at an FM station in North Bay. And when it came time to consider going to university, I kind of asked around. I think I applied to Queen's and U of T and various places. And then a friend of mine in North Bay was going to the University of Waterloo, and he said, hey, they're trying to put together a campus radio station. And I thought, ooh. Oh, that sounds good. So I went down and checked it out, and sure enough, there was the beginnings of a scratching of a radio station. So I applied to Waterloo and was accepted, which was a good thing and a bad thing. It was a good thing in the sense that it was a great time. It was a bad thing in the sense that because I got so involved in the station, I never finished first year. When I arrived, it was a club, the University of Waterloo Broadcasting Association, and they had just managed to get some used equipment from a station in Hamilton. And there was a Gates board and a couple of turntables and some mics and a clunky old Spotmaster tape machine with 99 settings on a dial you push back and forth. And each setting corresponded to a track of 90 seconds in length. So all your commercials and station IDs went on this machine. We cobbled it all together in a cinder block room in the Engineering 2 building, room 1304, and we got bell lines telephone lines to the campus center and to the student union building, I guess at what was then Waterloo Lutheran University. The station was in this one cinder block room, so anytime anybody turned a mic on, everybody else had to shut up. And I mean, it was masking tape and epoxy glue is what we referred to it as, getting this thing going and keeping it on air.
I didn't arrive at Radio Waterloo until 1968. I tracked it down to Engineering 2, 1304, this dank room with no windows. But it was full of energy, full of heat. And part of the heat was generated by the power supply for the broadcast console that was donated from another radio station in Hamilton, Ontario, CKOC, with valves, tubes. And then the rest of the heat was generated by the people there.
You've been listening to Words on Music on Radio Waterloo. Today my special guest was Skip Prokop of Lighthouse, drummer and leader. And this was recorded by cassette at the festival at the University of Waterloo last Saturday. Serving the twin campuses of the University of Waterloo and Waterloo Lutheran University, this is Radio Waterloo.
Screwed it again! Darn it!
Yeah, as I said, far too much time was spent in Eng 2 1304, just hanging out and playing and planning and scheming. And at the end of most days, Bill and Colin and I, and eventually Dave Gillick and Doug Baer, who were grade 13 students in 68 who came on campus in 69, we would adjourn to Angie's Kitchen on Herb, which I hear is still there, and served at that time the best fish and chips around. And we would sit there and plot and scheme until, it was 8 o'clock at night and time to go off and, oh yeah, study? Ooh.
So then we moved from Engineering 2 1304 to the campus center. Now that was good fun because we were right in the center of things. There was the pub, there were dances, there were people, the Federation of Students was nearby. It was just really where it was all happening. But remember, Radio Waterloo was nothing more at that time than a glorified jukebox. In fact, it was just closed circuit. Feeding into the sound system in the campus center to the village and various other locations around the University of Waterloo. So it was a bit of a play toy.
Eventually, we started lobbying the Federation of Students for a staff, and the staff was me, and I was hired. I think my pay was $80 a week. To manage the station and to push it through from Eng 2 1304 into the bar warehouse, and from there, hopefully, towards a license.
Now, Bruce, in his own inimitable way, had this nasally delivery. He was the round-mounded sound and gave it a bit of a buzz. I think he thought he was a latter-day Paul Drake, overseeing the Big 8 CKLW in Windsor, Ontario, where the hits just kept on coming. But that being said, it was just good fun, and we started to do some really innovative programs then, live music from this cramped little studio that we had, live broadcasts from elsewhere. There was the dance service called Whiplash, appropriately named, where we would play all these R&B tunes that got people down. You can't get up unless you get down.
I was introduced to these two young kids, they were 2 years younger than me, very exciting, from grade 13 at some high school in Kitchener, Doug Baer and Dave Gillick. And they became center core. I mean, they wanted this station, they wanted to be part of it, and they were incredible. They dug in on all levels. David eventually became a consultant, communications consultant in England. Doug, a professor of communications in Victoria, the university there. But we had an enormous amount of fun, just figuring it out, as I say, as we went along.
So it was time for the move to the Bauer warehouse. Proper studios, well, at least more or less proper. You know, an RCA ribbon microphone, the kind that you would have on the David Letterman show, or Larry King, you know, the big iconic microphone. You know, 2 studios, one live on air, another one for production, portable equipment. There was even a transmitter in a transmitter room there. And we had started, before we left the campus center, we started broadcasting on what was then known as cable FM. You know, we'd run a high quality bell line to the head end of the cable television company, Grand River Cable, and we were like any other station on the cable FM dial. People used FM cable in those days to get the distant signals in from Toronto, Chum FM, or the classical station CBL stereo, CBC station. So we were up there with them when we started to get a wider listenership as a result. Everyone who was on Grand River Cable in the Waterloo region. And we started doing very innovative programs as well.
When the bar warehouse went up and when we started looking for a license, hoping to get one, the question was, where do we put a tower? And one of the ideas that came along, and I'm sketchy again, this is 50 years ago, but one of the ideas that came along was why not put it on the high point of the campus, which was the Dana Porter building, the Arts Library, which was also the administration center. And it kind of, it had traction for a while, and then all of a sudden, it fell off. It wasn't going to happen. And I think there was a certain amount of concern about the security aspects of having the transmitter up there, about giving students access to the roof 24 hours a day. There may have just been safety concerns, I don't know. But for whatever combination of reasons, during what was, again, you know, the radical student period, there was an occupation of the administration building at one point, let's not forget. For various reasons, it didn't happen.
So you started, you were saying, in 1974 volunteering?
72.
72 volunteering.
I was actually trained by David Gillick.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And I was also sharing a house with 2 other Radio Waterloo people at the time, David Assman and Bill Culp. So I was immediately heavily involved with the station. I had been peripherally involved as much as I could when I was an undergrad, but I had a lot of courses and, you know, was focused on that. But I knew them, and I knew they had this house and that I needed a place to live while I was in grad school, so that's how that started. And then I was hanging around there so much and doing so much technical work that eventually I was brought on half-time, and then a couple of years later full-time. Before 1969, FM radio was classical music. That's all it was. And in 1969 that changed, and Chum FM in Toronto, believe it or not, became the first alternative FM station in Canada, and they were totally free form. And I think that was an inspiration for a lot of what people were doing at the time. Various commercial radio stations have come along and been alternative, and then the commercial pressures have forced them more and more towards the mainstream or a specific sound to capture a certain listenership. But I think that was the spirit of the time, was free-form alternative radio. You're aware of the split, the CKWR split, when it was clear that the Federation of Students and the University of Waterloo, for financial or political or regulatory reasons, could not fund or hold the license for an FM radio station, that group went off and formed CKWR.
The commission wasn't terribly interested in the kinds of things we were proposing. There were other fish to fry. Cable television had just started. Satellites were on the horizon, and taking up a bunch of time to develop policy for stations at universities wasn't high on the priority list. So David and Doug, and actually a bunch of us, through a philanthropist named Henry Crapo, who was a mathematician at the university and came from a very well-to-do family in Boston, decided to go for a community license for Kitchener-Waterloo, a community station license.
That was Wired World Incorporated and CKWR. The same CKWR that is there in the Kitchener-Waterloo community now and has been there for over 40 years.
I got the blues, baby. I got this tropical feeling blues. I got the blues, baby. Got this tropical feeling blues. I lost brother man. Leave when I say I pay my dues. I was born in 59 when you couldn't say what's in your mind. Mom used to say, stay home, John. Devils in the streets, those sons of a gun. I got the blues, baby. I got this tropical feeling blues. My dreams are over now and all I have is tropical feeling blues.
But it was that amazing day when Jerry Wooten and I shared the experience of turning on the CKWR transmitter for test transmission for the first time. There it was 202 watts effective radiated power on 98.7 megahertz as it was in those days. CKWR has changed frequencies since then and of course has boosted its power and changed its transmitter site. But back then it was amazing just to fire up that transmitter, to put a tape loop of music on and then drive around, Jerry Wooten and I, in my old Volkswagen Beetle and listen to the signal. And we were just so elated to have achieved that milestone and to know that so many people put their hearts and souls, including right back from the Radio Waterloo days, to get CKWR on the air. So that resulted in not one but two radio stations from the genesis of Radio Waterloo that provided access to the wider community to produce programs, to reheat the community, to fill a void between what you got from commercial broadcasters and the CBC. It's all amazing. It all started in many respects right out there with the creative environment that was and remains Radio Waterloo, CKMS, Sound FM.
I got the blues, baby. I got this tropical feeling blues. I got the blues, baby. Tropical feeling blues. I know those brother man. Leigh when I say I've paid my dues. I've paid my dues. I've paid my dues.
David Gillick kept working on that, and he ended up working. He's probably told you all this background.
I've gotten some of it, yeah.
Yeah, he was working for the Department of Communications, which is now Industry Canada, and believe it or not, at the time they had a social policies and programs branch within the Department of Communications, and they came up with the 50-watt FM license, the specifications, and the purpose of it was for groups to put up small 50-watt community FM stations across Canada. It was supposed to be inexpensive. The application process was supposed to be easy. So I actually took a phone call from David Gillick at the radio station in 1976. He said, "We've just implemented this program and I'm going to send you the forms and you're going to apply for an FM license." I said, "Oh, okay." And I talked to, out with the rest of the people, and we costed it out and went for it. And so that was the beginning of CKMS. When we were talking about what call letters we wanted to have RW, but Radio Western already had an RW. They were CHRW, Radio Western, and they already had call letters, because they had a carrier current AM operation going, and you had to get call letters for that. So they got the RW call letters before us, and Industry Canada, Department of Communications, wouldn't allow somebody else to have RW that was in the same geographical region because of confusion. So we just came up with a list of 10 possibilities and voted on them.
Do you know what the MS is for?
I have to take responsibility for that.
Oh.
We were going to be CKUW. I just didn't think that flowed off the tongue. And I was just thinking of things that flowed off the tongue easily. And CKMS flows off the tongue easily when you're giving a station ID. So that's where it came from.
Oh, okay.
Okay. CHUG was a
CHUG.
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 Was a suggestion at the time that I remember that I wasn't too keen on. We realized at the time that a campus radio station and the schedule that a campus radio station has is different from any other radio stations. We're not playing easy listening music 24/7. We've got different styles of music changing every couple of hours. We've got specific spoken word programming. We've got possibly radio drama, as we did later on. And in order to promote that so that people would know, oh, I can tune in at this specific time to hear this specific kind of music or this specific kind of spoken word or whatever programming, you had to have a program guide. So it was a promotional tool. It was we saw it as a necessary adjunct to the programming, or to tell people that we existed and this is what we do and this is when to tune in to listen to the kinds of things that you think you might be interested in.
When did you join with CKMS?
In 1978. I used to listen to CKMS, and they were always looking for volunteers. So the first time I went in the production studio, and it was all vinyl, and I went in and I did this I played it back and everything was in reverb, so it was just a disaster. Oh God. And then so I kind of got scared off from it, and then radio theater started, so I went back and I was part of Sarah Goes to College and some sort of sci-fi show they had, and then all these kind of murder mystery things that they did. But Sarah Goes to College was a big one because there was I think 32 people involved, and they were all programmers from the store or from the station, and a lot of them were in math or science at U of W. So that was kind of funny.
Why did FM Times end in '83?
It was bleeding us dry. It was bleeding red ink. It almost, we almost went broke producing the FM Times. We hired any number of advertising coordinators who tried to sell advertising for it to make it pay for itself. It never worked out. We actually had a financial crisis because of it. That was when we sat down as a staff and said, look, we're as I recall, we were $30,000 in the hole. And we said, we got to do something about this. We said, okay, we're all going to switch from a 5-day week to a 4-day week. We're going to take we're going to take a pay cut for 5 days to 4 days, and we're going to do what we can in those 4 days. But that's the only way that we can balance the budget and slowly eat away at this deficit without going to the students and saying we need another fee increase. And we managed to keep the fee at $4.50 per term for a long, long time by being very frugal with our expenses and keeping our staff levels constant.
There was a lot going on in the Palindrome. A lot of bands would come in there and record stuff. You ask Bill Worry, Anvil was in there. I think the Real Statics did something in there. Let me think here. all the cool Sonic Boom was an awesome band that was involved with CKMS, with a whole bunch of really great players. So they used to actually, I think at one point they would have recording sessions in there and maybe charge some of the musicians for studio time. You have to ask Bill Worry that.
What came to be called Palindrome at the time was called Track 4, very creative name. So I got involved with the audio engineering. My degree was in electrical engineering and my specialty was audio. So it was just a natural fit for me to be involved that way.
Nice. Do you know when Track 4 became Palindrome?
I couldn't give you a date. It would have probably been the early 80s when we bought a Tascam 80-8 half-inch reel-to-reel, and obviously then Track 4 didn't make any sense.
Right.
And again, that was mine. I have to take responsibility for that. I was trying to think of a new name that was a palindrome, that was the same forward and backwards, and I couldn't think of one that fit. And I thought, well, why not just call it Palindrome? No.
Yeah.
And it stuck. It's one of these things where when you name something, there's all this angst and debate about what you should name it and does the name make any sense. Once you name it and everybody starts using it, it just becomes the name, and that's fine.
Yeah.
It's like Sound FM.
Yeah.
You know, there were maybe when that came out, people thought, oh, well, you know, but no, now it's Sound FM, and it's accepted, and that's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things we really did was we really encouraged programmers to contact local bands that they were aware of or that they played on their show and bring them into the recording studio and put them live on the air. And for me, that was one of the funnest things I got to do, even if I had to come in on a Thursday night or a Friday night or a Saturday night, was to set up a band and have them play live on the air. Live music out of our studio, going out over the air, and then they go into the studio and talk to the DJ. That was, I think, one of the most innovative things that we did to promote local talent or alternative talent. You know, the heavy metal guys, they were stalwarts, right? Nobody else was playing heavy metal other than campus radio. The woman who did the death metal show, Kill, Eat, Exploit the Weak, she knew all these black metal and death metal bands, and they would come in and set up in the studio and play live on her show. And Dan Kieswetter, who did the mainstream metal show, he was bringing in bands all the time. We had Alexis on Fire in the studio just before they broke nationally. We had Anvil in, who are this legendary Canadian metal band from the 70s. We had Kevin Doyle, who did the blues show, and he would bring in all these blues bands. We had, a blues night. It took over his entire show. We had 4 or 5 different local blues artists. We had Daddy Longlegs, we had Alex Tintinelli, we had Poor Charlie and Beverly Robertson. He brought in Scott B. Sympathy for a night on the air. Plus, we'd have other people bringing in, more local bands. We had Julie Doiron come in. She was from Atlantic Canada. She was in Eric's Trip, and then she had a solo career. So that was, we had David Essig come in, a legendary Canadian folk artist. So that was a regular thing we did. And I think looking back on it, that was for me the most fun. And also for me, to the risk of repeating myself, one of the most innovative things that we were doing.
This isn't hardcore, this is no-core. Get it right.
Yeah, we had the usual crew of volunteers showing up, every September or January or whenever. The usual hassles with filling the 6 to 8 a.m. slot and getting people to fill out their paperwork and just cruising along, keeping the station running. there was always something going on, but I think in terms of what people heard over the air, it would have sounded, I wouldn't say a well-oiled machine, but at least there was programs on the air, the news was being done regularly, the spoken word programs happened regularly, the signal was reliable, especially after we went to 250 watts at 100.3. We had managed to save up enough money that we could just pay cash for the approximately $20,000 to $25,000 cost of doing that. So we just went ahead and did it. We went through the application process, and again the technical regime had changed. Industry Canada had become much more flexible, what is known as drop-in frequencies. You could hire an engineer, which we had to do. We had to hire a broadcast engineering consultant to find us a frequency, and where you could sort of shoehorn this little 250 watts or 500 watts or 300 watts or whatever it was at whatever frequency in this little area, and it wouldn't interfere with anybody else, and so you could go ahead and do that. And so it took about a year to a year and a half with the application process. There was a complication because there was 2 other radio stations applying at the same time for 100.3. One of them was this Six Nations Reserve station at Ohsweken, and another one was a Christian music station in Barrie. And we had to sign agreements with both of them that our contours did not in fact overlap, and we would not intervene against each other or make complaints against each other. And this was all because of this loosening up of the regulations and allowing drop-in frequencies.
Well, it was like a business then because there were employees, right? They had Bill, who did the palindrome, and I can't remember the gentleman who did the news, but they had someone who worked in the front desk. They had someone who was a music director. So there were lots of employees. It was very different in that you were a volunteer. You weren't paying, so you would show up and everything would be there ready for you. The new releases would be on the walls, labeled, numbered, cataloged, and the stacks were full and alphabetized for records and CDs. It was just a really smoothly run operation.
Frank Felly was there, and who else was president? Doc Height, I think, was president for a while. And so those guys were, really into experimental, different types of music. So there was a jazz show there. I think Scott Crockett had a jazz show there. I'm not sure how long that lasted. It was called Let's Get Lost. It was a great jazz show. And then Doc had a jazz show. He went on to CFMY to do his show. It was Height of Jazz, I think it was called, something like that. There were a bunch of people that went from CKMS into national radio shows. Pete, I forgot his last name, he ended up on Q107 at one point.
Pete Fowler.
Pete Fowler.
Yeah. He just came back to CKMS. Yeah.
Wow.
Pete Fowler and Greg Secord.
Okay.
Just started a show called The Lost Indie City on CKMS.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
Well, Pete's, he's really experienced. He knows what he's doing, so that's really good.
Yeah.
Tell him I say hi.
Oh,
We're
okay.
like longtime friends.
Wow, okay,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
You are listening to The Rock Show. It is January 7th, 2008, the very first show of the year. Very excited. We are talking with Downs. We thank you guys so much for coming into the station and finding your way after getting lost.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you guys were here and you played an awesome set. So tell me a little bit. This is the first album that you guys are writing right now, right?
Yeah, we're doing just a 6-song EP right now. We recorded a demo last year, and this will be like a collaboration of some new songs and some of the ones on the demo redone.
Alright, it's A-OK, the Pre-Bomb Show, every single Wednesday night from 9 to 10 p.m. on CKMS 100.3 FM. In the studio right now, in Studio A, CKMS 100.3 FM. I've even been being recorded, so this is going to be in visual and audio. How's it going? It's good to see you. We have Cyanide Kiss in the studio. Guys, how are you doing today?
Excellent.
Great. Doing excellent. We had you guys on the show before. It was a wonderful time having you guys on, and that's why we love to have you guys on again.
It was a good time.
As part of our great UW talent search. And you guys are definitely UW talent. Emphasize on the talent.
We're all Waterloo students, grads, former UW personnel. So yeah,
former UW personnel.
Yeah.
So you must be you must sympathize with us when we say that this is the exam suck show.
Oh yeah, big time. Like the whole next month is gonna suck, right?
Hi, my name is Ardo O'Cal with the Score Television Network. I've been a supporter of March of Dimes for over 13 years, having canvassed my neighborhood. With Corey Graves, I'm Kyle Edwards. Welcome to another edition of This Week in WWE.
Things were good. Things were really good. We were financially sound. There was no the students knew we were there. The ones who wanted to join us joined us. The ones who wanted their money back, we gave them the option.
Well, every term, every student paid $5. Every student at the University of Waterloo paid $5 as part of their tuition. It was a refundable fee, so if you trudged out to the station and said, "Please, sir, I'd like my $5 back," they would happily hand you kept a box of $5 bills just in case that happened, especially the first few weeks after money came out for school. So that's how it was funded, and it would be, hundreds of thousands of dollars that would come in every year. So that's how we could afford to have 4 or 5 staff members and the facility and the things we had then.
So we're at the Sonic Boom Awards here, CKMS, Federation Hall Waterloo. Got my man Tibor, and we're just hanging out. How you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good.
Now, how do we say your name?
Tibor.
Tibor, I said it right.
And I'm from the art project Sorrow of One.
Sorrow of One?
Sorrow of One.
Have you guys played yet?
Solo. Yeah, solo album.
When's it happening? You doing it tonight?
No. It's already released.
Okay.
It's not live performed.
And you got a MySpace?
Yeah.
Right on, right on.
And I'm playing with Rebel Rouser tonight.
Rebel Rouser.
Yeah.
Right on. And who's on stage right now? Do you know?
No, I don't know.
I think we should possibly check out the band out there. So I guess we'll sign off. Thanks for the washroom interview.
It was meant to be kind of a show. So it was presented at the Fed Hall, I think. And so a lot of the people who had shows actually also had bands themselves. So they were invited to be part of the stage show that we had, but in between acts, awards would be presented to various shows. So it was the best spoken word show or the best this show. So a lot of people, there were a lot of awards. It was meant to include people and to acknowledge them and to encourage them and that kind of thing. And it was also meant to get the word out of the station as well, so that here's a cool place and this is what we programmed, here's some of the bands that appear on the show, and here's some of the shows that you can listen to on the station. So it was pretty good. It was actually a pretty splashy show.
Who are you guys, and why are you here?
We're Bocce, and most likely we're here because half of our members were former CKMS DJs.
DJs, nice. That's awesome. And this is the drummer right here. He was rocking it out.
Thank you.
Is this true?
This is true.
This is true. He had the headphones on. He was rocking out to the headphones.
Can you rock in headphones? I don't know.
I think you can. No, it's totally plausible.
I've been thinking about this lately, before we came in here, and I wanted to make this point that people say, students don't listen to CKMS. Any radio station in any market in Canada, if they had a 5% share of the audience, they'd be uncorking the champagne. Because that would mean that they had a significant enough share in the hugely fragmented radio listening market. So to expect CKMS to have 50% or 25% of the students listening to CKMS was unrealistic. You could never meet that goal. And that's just of 5% of radio listeners. There are people who just don't listen to radio. So it's not about, this is something that all the students listen to all the time. This is something that some students listen to some of the time. This is something that some students have an opportunity to volunteer in because they're interested or passionate about it, or they want to, they're taking a general arts degree, but they really want to work in communications or in radio, and to get experience doing that. And it's part of the student life milieu of the university. It's one of those things that, like everything else in a democratic society, that we pay a small amount for each individually, but because we each contribute a small amount to it, this bigger thing is allowed to exist. And it provides a link between the campus and the community, because half of our programmers were from the community, or were students who had graduated and had stayed in the area and had jobs in the area and kept their programs even after they graduated. None of that seemed to matter, and none of that, we didn't seem to be able to communicate that in a meaningful way during the referendum. In the end, it was all about money. Am I going to pay $5.50 a term or not? Well, it doesn't do anything for me. I don't listen to it, so I'm not going to pay for it. The 1,200 people, whoever who did say, yes, I'm going to continue to pay for it, either took that self-interested view and said, yes, I listen to it sometimes, or I know if my friend volunteers or my friend listens to it, or they got the bigger picture about providing this facility that's available to all students to use if they choose to, for this very nominal amount of money.
Yeah. We had, I believe it was 2003, I can't remember exactly when. Believe it or not, I've actually tried to forget a lot of this because it was a really painful period for a lot of the people involved. So we actually went to the Federation of Students for a fee increase. And we were supposed to be at the meeting at such and such a time. We got to the meeting, we barely got in, and they approved the fee increase. They approved the fee increase. The feds approved the fee increase. So we were bringing in $5.50 a semester, and there was one student that came out, and I was very nice. I was like, "Hi, how's it going?" She didn't say a word to me. Didn't say word one. She just handed, I guess she handed me the slip for the $5.50. So I went quiet too. I figured, if she's going to play that game, I'll play the game too. So she gets all quiet. I got all quiet, and it was the most awkward situation I've ever been in, where it was like it was a silent transaction through the entire thing. And generally that wasn't the case, but there were. I think there was a little bit of a resentment well, originally it was $4.50, but it ended up going up to $5.50, and again, you'd have to come out to the station to get it back. But generally, students didn't do that. They just let it go because it was $5.50. That was it. And of all the fees that were on their that they had to pay, it was generally not. It actually wasn't the highest of any of the fees that were there, and so I don't see why there was a resentment toward it. But I guess they wanted their hamburger for a day or something. Like they wanted the deluxe burger. That's what it was.
Yes, I was with the ugly time. That is my claim to fame.
But in 2002, when you started, can you maybe talk about that time and how the station was funded then?
Yeah, the station when I entered the picture was already a station in crisis. So there had been political issues and there had been funding issues, and basically the university had intervened to say that if the radio station acquired a manager, that would be an intervention that would suffice to get the station on track, so to speak. And when I walked into the station, I was surprised how far away from the campus it was. It was down an old dirt road behind like a cornfield, and in a warehouse. And so that was interesting enough. There was no bus routes. I was like, in terms of accessibility, in my opinion, it was utterly ridiculous in a community of this type of affluence. So those were some red flags when I took the job. So one of the major things we did in that first or second year was we started recruiting students, and we started developing shows that were very campus based. And there was backlash to that sort of thing. And the other thing was trying to do shows that were more information laden and that were really campus oriented took resources and time and energy. And you probably learned this from doing your news program. It takes a lot to do spoken word or do solid spoken word material for the radio. It takes a lot more than spinning some records. So we were developing that. We hired a program coordinator that was really focused on that. She was from TVO, so she had some skills, had worked on the agenda, had some good editorial skills that way.
I found a very interesting challenge just because the nature of the programming was so diverse and that's the beauty of campus and community radio stations. They span the community and the campus. So we had international shows. We had people programming in Hindi and in Spanish and in all sorts of different languages from the community. We had people from the community who were just doing music that they loved, like rock and roll or whatever it was, and had the certain niche. Blues. We had all sorts of interesting music shows. There was a Christian rock show. This is so diverse. And then from the campus, we had campus association groups. The Chinese Students Association had a show, and all sorts of other groups. It was balanced about 60-40, 60 community, 40 campus, I think, at the time. And maybe that was not as high as it should be from the campus side of things.
And the program coordinator's job was to really develop that on-campus relevancy, not just to serve the campus, but to be that bridge from the campus into the community, so people would want to tune in and listen to what the campus had to say. I mean, you've got this incredible resource of intellectuals and academics doing research in all sorts of fields. That was part of the vision, was to have that represented at the station. There wasn't enough time, there wasn't enough political will, and there weren't enough resources to have that realized before the shitstorm.
There was an AGM that we did where I don't know who figured it out, but somebody found a loophole in the bylaws that had them. They could bring in an infinite number of proxies. So we had students showing up with upwards of 30, 35 proxies in their possession. And at one point the meeting just stopped, just shut down, because there was so much. We had to do this count with these proxies, and then we had to do this count with the people who were there. It was a nightmare. And then, to top it all off, my vice president accuses me of not being around.
I thought I read that you were president.
Yeah, for a couple months, not very long, 4 months or something like that. I got one motion passed. Basically, no one is allowed to have a proxy, you have one proxy vote each. None of this multi-proxy stuff anymore. I can't remember, you'd have to ask Rob, but I got that motion passed during that 4 months I was there, and that was a big thing. But that was an interesting time too, because there was a lot of turmoil going on with the Federation of Students and us.
We thought we were all united. We thought we were a united board, and then all of a sudden, bam, he comes out of nowhere and hits us with this. And of course, with that AGM with the proxies, it just shut things down. We barely got a vote to adjourn. We were there, had to be pushing 2-3 hours trying to sort this all out. And when we couldn't conduct business. They had the students and whomever had brought in all the proxies basically brought them in with the notion to shut the meeting down, to basically stop us from doing business.
It was sometime in 2008. It was early. It was like right after Christmas, I think in January. I don't even remember anymore. It was deeply traumatizing. It was horrible. I've finally taken a weekend away because I actually thought we were safe. Like shows you where I was at. But I really thought we had accomplished a lot. I knew that there was people that were angry, but there's always been people who were enemies of this station.
That came totally out of left field, as far as I was concerned. I got a phone call on a Saturday afternoon saying the Students' Council meeting on Sunday afternoon is going to be considering a last-minute agenda item to hold a referendum on whether or not the Radio Waterloo fee will continue. And I was just like, what's this about? Because ever since we had hired Heather Majuri as station manager, she was always working to maintain communications with the Federation of Students, let them know what we were doing, asking them, what can we do for you? Always trying to keep these lines of communications open. So the fact that this one student counselor, on the basis of talking to a dozen or so people in the math building, saying, do you know what CKMS is? Do you listen to CKMS? Would put forth this motion to have a referendum was just mind-boggling.
And the question was a reversed question. It was tricky in that if you voted yes, you were really voting no, kind of thing, which was quite the dilemma. They worked hard on that, those guys. They worked real hard. So I got into the station and I said, okay, well, let's put up an announcement saying vote no means yes or yes means vote no or whatever, and vote for CKMS. So they were listening. They were monitoring us. So the minute that went, because of course that's what somebody's going to do, and I hadn't read every detail of the CRTC in the moment. So we put it up, and I think they called when it was running. I think the first time, it was to say we were in violation of the referendum rules. Yeah, I was like, oh, I get it. This is hostile. This is beyond, right?
It was early in the campaign, and I brought in the head of our side of the referendum, and I asked him questions about the referendum. I didn't ask him anything controversial or anything like that. Next thing I know, I think it was called a cease and desist or something like that, and the station was fined for interfering with the referendum, because although I was interviewing a student, I was not a student myself. So yeah, they were getting that nitpicky about it.
No employees, because we weren't students, would be able to speak on behalf of the station. So we're the ones with the knowledge of the everyday runnings. We're the ones with most of the knowledge in terms of governance, even all that stuff. No, we couldn't speak on behalf of the station. So it was dirty. It was just a dirty politic all the way around. Kevin Royal was the president at the time, and he'd been on our board the year before. We needed students to represent us, and we needed students to be at our booths and things. Mark was not the best person, the best choice in that way, but he was who was available. So it was kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario, right? Like it was like, I don't know what to say about this, right? Because your image is also in flux. There is no single image to CKMS. There's absolutely no single image. So no matter who we put out front, there's going to be people who don't like them. Like, I don't know how you fix any of that. That's part of who we are. Part of our identity is our pluralism. And that in itself was one of the dilemmas, right? So, yeah, Mark Green, there was 2 suicides after all of this. I don't know if they were linked to this. Sometimes I think that they definitely were. And ironically, probably at 2 ends of the polls. So you had Mark Green on one end and Jeff Aho on the other. And Jeff Aho was the young man who took it upon himself during the first referendum. It was his cause. He was the lead of that.
Wow. Oh, I didn't know about Jeff Aho.
Yeah, that's why I had to do therapy.
No.
Definitely. I was like, okay. Yeah, Jeff committed suicide the next year.
Oh, wow.
It felt like we were at war. It really did. One of the very few times where I've ever felt so passionate about saving a place, saving the fundamentals for which it stood for. And again, I'm glad of my time there, but I've tried to forget, because it was a very painful period. Part of the downfall here was the fact that we had stayed hidden for 30 years, or had stayed off the Fed's radar, which I understand now Imprint is on the Fed's radar now to get to at least downsize them to a smaller location. And it's just, to me, it's just history repeating itself. Poli-sci students that want to make a name for themselves before they get out in the big world. Sorry if I sound bitter, but
yeah,
no. That was again, like I said, a very tough time in my life, and in the lives of a lot of people who put a lot of time into that station, and just got it all pulled out from underneath them.
Currently, I'm the president of the Federation of Students at Waterloo. Being involved is such an important element to the student experience. I came to Waterloo not just to get a job at the end of my degree, but to make sure that I got some life experience and align my values with my studies. I came to Waterloo because I wanted to study what I care about. I'm in the Bachelor of Independent Studies, studying leadership development. Tell me about my program? Well, it's an unconventional degree. I get to create my own curriculum and design my own program. A big part of my program has been getting involved in student life on campus.
Okay, the referendum happened in February, and we lost it by 3-2, approximately. The usual small turnout. What was it, 1,800 to 1,200?
I think they said it was less than 13%.
Yeah. And after we got over the shock of losing, I was the finance guy, I was the bookkeeping guy. I looked at how much money we had in the bank. We were going to receive our student fees up to, it was canceled as of September. So we would still get our May fee check. And as of September, they would stop. And I looked at it and said, you can afford to keep on one half-time staff person, and I recommend that be the secretary receptionist, somebody who sits at the front door, does the books, pays the bills, and acts as a gatekeeper for people coming through the door. And meanwhile, all the other functions, library, volunteer training, schedule coordination is going to have to be done by volunteers. And you can continue to operate for 1 year under that model. And then you're going to run out of money. Because you got to pay the telephone, you got to pay the insurance, you got to pay all those other costs, equipment maintenance. But staff obviously is the biggest expense of any organization like that. And that said, this is the only way. This is the only way that you can carry on for a year and maybe try to win a second referendum to get your funding back. It was interesting that the university sent us a letter almost right away, telling us to vacate the premises by August 31st.
There was so much misinformation and gossip going around. They really thought that we didn't have enough money to weather that storm, and it was like, sure we do. We just have to lay ourselves off, and here's some money, and so the station will stay. And I think that surprised a lot of people, which I'm totally fine with. I felt very strongly that I had managed the station fairly fiscally responsibly. So I've always taken it highly personally when anybody criticized in that way. Did I make the odd mistake here and there? Like, I got attacked for, I didn't have my budget in front of me, and I'm dyslexic at the best of times. And I was also exhausted. I'd been working like 60 or 70 hours, right? Just dealing with all of this a week. And the record called me and asked what my budget was. And I think I said 254,000, and it's really 245,000. So, you know, that went out there in the Ethernet world and cyberspace that, you know, I don't even know my budget, blah, 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 blah. I'm lying to people. First of all, it was $9,000 difference, big deal. And no, like, that's just called human error in the moment. Like, so I was wasting massive time dealing with those kinds of inflations and misinformations. And yes, they're very good at that. They've been trained in their sharkdom.
The second referendum was being handled by a team I was part of. Oh geez, I'm having brain farts here. Excuse my brain at this moment. But it was a young lad. He got kind of scared, and he wandered. He was our president at the time.
I think I know. Steve Krychak.
Steve Krychak. Sorry, Steve. Getting old here, okay? He got all this weight thrown on his shoulder, and he was trying to attend university and for the love of music and everything. And pretty young. He'd not had the experience that, you know, I'd had with life kicking you in the teeth and knowing that you just get back up and spit out the blood and just keep storming on and get ready to swing once in a while in case someone swings at you. He was involved, and he really worked hard on this project. So not to make him, you know, anything's held against Stephen for what happened. He hustled his butt trying to get the second referendum down, with a number of other people involved with him that helped him out. And as far as I'm concerned, we won. Most of us think we won, and we feel that somehow, because they decided to use the computer, they were able to cheat us 200-300 votes. That's how far it came down. It went from total chaos, vote, you're screwed, you're not getting anything, which was held by people signing, filling out a form, to computer, everyone votes on computer, let's make sure that they don't win. And I think if we were allowed to have some of our experts, Nathan, who was a very great help for the station back then too, with Steve, and let these people and Matt, who were very well known in their computers, knowing the study, that they could look at this and see if there was any flaws or anyone tried to play with it or something in the Federation. And I still think we won it, but because of that difference. And like I said, it comes down to then we had, suicides on both sides, and it was just a mess. Steve, he bailed on us. And he left us hanging, and that was officially when I took over.
When the 27th finally came, I did it just happened to be a Friday. I did my last show. No one was in the building. I left with no fanfare, no congratulations, no nothing. It was one of the worst ways of leaving ever. I just left, and that was it. I turned in my keys. That was it. I took pictures to remember the station by, because it was that kind of sad goodbye. I mean, I even wanted to go so far as to put graffiti on the outside. Real people worked here, but I never did. Exactly. But it was just a dream that I wanted to do, and my wife talked me out of it essentially. So, which was good, because I don't want a graffiti charge on my record.
The old station. Here is Studio A. Studio A right here. Studio B. Welcome to CKMS.
And I couldn't believe that these youngsters were trying to destroy an institution that had been here for like 30 years now. It's been, 40 years, right? So, and struggling to stay alive all the time without funding. And so I became, the station became my station as it became your station and everyone else that was there, and yet half the people abandoned ship. We made fun of a lot of them because they were like the ship sinking and rats leaving, and we should have all just come together and tried to work together, but usually it's like that in life. There's always just a few people that actually pull up their pants, pull up their socks, or for the ladies, tighten those bra straps and get in there and get your hands dirty. And my wife and I, and CC was her radio name, and Brad Marshall, a good sound tech from this region here, who's done a lot of concerts and worked with a lot of the promoters in the area, and one of the ex-presidents who took on after me, he got involved. KLP, Christy Leigh Palmer, what a sweetheart she was. She was there, right? It affected her so badly that it was affecting her job. The loss of this radio station and the drive that we had, it was affecting her life, terrible. So she came to me crying one day, and by this time I'd been elected president. And she says, I can't do this anymore. She says, something's got to give. She says, it's affecting my job, worrying about this place. And gave her a big hug. And I said to Christy, I said, listen, you've got to take care of yourself first and your family. You got your nanny living with you too, and life goes on. I said, we'll do fine. She was such a big help with me, helping me keep some of the paperwork going. And so again, the teamwork was there, but sometimes it was falling apart, trying to keep this place going. And so one of the biggest problems we had near the end of the leaving of the station was the tower. The tower was ours. We were supposed to get it. We could shorten it. I had a team ready to come in and tear it all apart, and we could reassemble it somewhere else that we could make arrangements to do such a thing. The administration of the university decided at the last moment without any answer. And Christy Lee Palmer was with me at this meeting. They proclaimed that it was their tower. They wanted it. They were giving it to us at first, then they took back their word. And that's documented. We have the paperwork, who knows where it is now, but I know that there's a number of witnesses from our side of the meeting. And that tower was supposed to be ours to use to either sell, to buy another system, a smaller one, or use that one somewhere on another location so we could have the range. Anyhow, so next thing you know, a few days before, there was a company that I guess installed towers said to us that we'll give you an assessment what it will cost to move it. I said, okay, that's fine. No price was ever mentioned to any of us. And then they went to the university and said, oh, they owe us some thousands of dollars for this, the movement of this tower, and that we reneged, and we never reneged. You never told us any price. That's when the university, and I'm not going to say any names because it's all history in the past, and the schmucks know who they are. They robbed us, basically. They wanted to bury the station dead. Their embarrassment because of some young people that were involved in this thing that really didn't know their, I guess I'll say it, ass from a hole in the ground. They just thought that they'd sound important and destroy something that was took years to keep moving. And at the end of all this dust and everything, when we were finally moving it, 2 people dead, suicides over this whole issue. One from their team, one from our team. And just a matter of funding. The system worked fine before. If you didn't want to pay, rightfully just come get your money, So they came and they stole the tower. They did it all really so quick. And I don't know how much money the university got from it. The university covered up the suicides, kept it very quiet. There we were given a due date to get out. I had a friend of mine that installed towers I used to work with years ago. He and I grew up together, and I said, what's the best deal you could do for me to help me save a radio station? And he says, about $3,000. I said, okay, let's do it. I negotiated with a music lover who owns the, down the road automotive center. I believe that's Albert Street there he's on. Anyhow, on one of his properties right near there, we negotiated, and I said, listen, all we need is just the power from your house here. He wanted to rent us the house, and I would have loved to do that, but we just didn't have enough income. If we had generated enough revenue in advertising and membership, we could have rented that house, and it would have been perfect for a small little radio station to run out of. Financially, we just couldn't do it, but we're so grateful that these gents, Les and his boss, helped us out so dearly and allowed us to put a shelf, put a shed there for our transmitter. And thanks to Elgin Satellite, my friend Lloyd, he came in and hooked up this big tower for us and took a radio transponder at the end, and then he ran the cable down for us, and we hooked it all in, and it was quite something. We got it all set up, and then all of a sudden, next thing you know, some guy comes freaking out from the property next door that owned the plaza next door and says, "You're on my land."
Things are going well, but with that land dispute thing, it's kind of drained a lot of our energy, mentally and physically right now. And as I said, I've been told to stay on the blanket. I've been put on the blanket. I guess it's better than being put in the doghouse.
That's it.
Hi, dog.
Hey, lovely.
How's it going?
Better days. The property owner comes over and he says, property line goes from here across here. He says, we take up part of your land, and the property goes like this. And the way it looks like it's like square, right, or a rectangle. And instead it was more crosswise. So exactly where we put the tower and the shed was on someone else's property. So he threatened to sue us right there on the spot. And so the gents from down the road there, and they have a horticulture center there too. They brought over all their equipment and they dug up the tower, and here's this monstrous tower, and here's the shed, and all his boys show up, didn't charge us anything, picked up the big shed, put it over where it's supposed to be, dug up the property with our technician who put the tower in there from Elgin Satellite, and he picks up the tower with his little backhoe, and he brings it over. He'd already dug the hole, and he plopped it where it is today, and put it in, and we buried it all, filled it all in, and everything's patent, and we made sure it was all leveled out, and Lloyd climbs up the tower, looks at it, we put a flag on it, and finally it was like, okay, now it's permanent. Now we're gonna keep this tower here.
So I was approached by James Walker, the road dog, and a couple other people at the station to attend the last meeting to gather a feel what was going on, and then also to deliver like a little bit of a speech about Maxwell's. So just trying to recall all the information, so it was a while ago now, but so basically I was asked and approached if we had any space at the old location for Maxwell's on King Street. 220 King Street North was the old address, in the same plaza with Phil's and the Raintree Cafe. And in that location we had a music school above, and we had the live concert performance space on the main floor. And in the music school we were still in the growth stages, so we were not using all the rooms up to capacity, and we had a couple big rooms at the back. And I know that the station was quite a bit larger at the old location on campus, and so that was the biggest concern for the people at the AGM. And so when we went through all the motions, sorry, no problem, you can turn that off. So we went through all the motions, basically we came to an understanding that there was space available. We were interested in renting a space out on a month-to-month basis, and we were going to sign a contract. And then so we went through, there was a vote with the Sun FM board, and they voted in favor to move the station. So we came up with a figure of rent based on square footage that we were paying at the time. So we wanted to make it as completely transparent, as fair as possible. So that's how it started. That was the shape. Everybody was pretty sad to have this station kind of dissolve, and they had a lot of space there, and a lot of history, a lot of memories, and a lot of equipment. And so the status, to answer your question, was it was this kind of not a panic, but definitely a sad state in terms of a lot of people were very concerned moving forward, and there was a lot of community members involved and a lot of students. So that's what's kind of where it was left and where I came in.
And welcome, folks. This is the Road Dog doing a special exclusive interview here with the band Paint, who are going to be performing here tonight at Maxwell's. I was in pain all the time, and yet I'd be staying there all night just to do things, just to keep things up and running, and the paperwork that needed to be done. I was training the new president what to do, and keep some of the other people involved, and try to get a committee started, which originally we had no committee. It just sort of me became a general patent, which sometimes you find it has to be done kind of thing. I felt like a dictator some days, it just had to be done just to get things done, because so many other people were just, blah, 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 blah. And then I say, okay, well, if you can do it, do it. And then we never saw them again, or they didn't, full of promises. They didn't know how to obtain what they were promising.
CKMS 100.3 Sound FM. My name's the Doctor looking after you. That's right, Street Mix is on air. 19 minutes after 4 p.m. Toronto time, you're in the mix. Want to take a shout out to Dave Jenkins.
Keep it out of you.
Dave's listening online at www.soundfm.ca. Also want to take a shout out to my father. He's also listening online too as well. We're keeping it going for you right until 6 p.m. You're listening to it live, 100.3 Sound FM right here on the radio.
Yeah, Road Dogg cared about the station though, more than anybody else there. He really cared and he really wanted it to succeed. Back at the university, you had a whole staff taking care of everything. You had everything, you know, going through the channels that it needed to. As soon as it left, it turned into, yeah, you have this board, but you have an accountant that's not an accountant. You have a technician that isn't a technician. And yeah, they met for these meetings, and what frustrated me is we met for these meetings and talked about all this stuff, but then everybody disappeared and nothing got done. So it turned into, how are things actually gonna not quite get back to how they were, but run properly and smoothly.
The big thing that was changing was the station was moving from a more of a charity type station into a working charity where they had to raise funds, and rather than have funds that were kind of allotted to them through the student body. So Dan came up with this this model that was a membership-based model after a station he saw in Vancouver that was running the same model, and it was basically every person that has a show would have to contribute a certain amount, and then everybody was requested to go out and try to find advertisements for their show, and then they would have those advertisements would help pay for the bills at that point. So they were switching to this co-op model, was what he called it, and that was the transition that was happening at the time.
You stuck around with the station once it became co-op and you had to pay to do a show.
Yeah, I did.
What kept you staying with the station even though it was so different where now you would have to pay to do it?
Because I love radio, and I thought, I can do this. I can still do radio, and I can help out small businesses that can't really afford to advertise, and see if I can get all these sponsors. So at one point I had 8 sponsors, but it was really cheap advertising for them, just to help them out, just give them a leg up. So that's what I did, and that's why I stayed. Radio is a part of me, this is all I've ever, I love writing as well. I'm torn between the two. I can make them both work. Radio is creating, writing is creating too, but sometimes sitting behind this board between 4 and 6, it's like, I'm creating a piece of sound here.
I think that it was just really tough to steer the ship in a completely different course than that was happening for many, many years, especially people that were with the station for decades at that point. They were used to a certain model that worked, and they worked under that model for many years, and I think when you try to change directions and then you have a lot of other people trying to give their input, instead of one focal point and one leader that's going to say, this is the way it's going to work, guys, and we need to all jump on here. I think that was really tough for them to go through that transition. So that was the hard part. All the other problems that we had were all typical problems of having a lot of people under one roof and trying to manage space and time and sound in this case. But it was it has great moments and its bad moments, and like I said, at the end it worked out for everybody that they did find a new home, and they did pay off all the arrears that they promised us. In hindsight, if things worked better with the paying the bills with the station, I think they would have been there a lot longer, because I definitely didn't have any there wasn't any animosity going on between people. It was, when money gets in the way, it gets tough because people get upset. So that was a natural thing that people would get frustrated, but like I said, at the end everything was all smoothed over.
Okay, here's a good example of Maxwell's. One afternoon I had Rita Chiarelli as a guest in the studio, and they had drum lessons going on right next door, and she's sitting there going, "What's that?" And I said, "Oh, that's the next Buddy Rich, right?" You'd have to include the drumming into your show because it was so loud. It would bleed into any interview that you did. So that's what would happen at Maxwell's. It was a small little space. And it was a good little interim space, but it was way too small for everything that was going on. We were frankly paying far too much rent. That's the other thing. Just absorbent amount of rent. So I'm really glad then we moved to Waterloo Street, because it was a nice little space and you could breathe again.
Waterloo Street venue itself, it had this like huge ceiling. It was just like a massive space, and anyone who walked in there was like impressed. You know, you kind of get that like impression of grandeur right away. So that might be why it was such an attractive space for a lot of shows. But what went south with that place was people got suspicious of the landlord, and the problem was the landlord's unit. He lived in the building. This is in a commercial building in a residential area, so his unit was right next door to our unit. And since there were so many shows, and we would have, like a metal show going on till like 2 a.m. and they'd have like bands come in and stuff like this. And the guy would barge in apparently in his pajamas at all hours and just tell us to shut it off, kind of thing. Like really mad, and he had the key for the door. He would just basically just come in. So people kind of got irritated with the guy. And then there was kind of this paranoia around. There was a storage unit right adjacent to ours, and it had some black stuff in it or something, and people were like, oh, there's mold, and the mold is going everywhere through the ventilation, and it's not healthy, and all this stuff. And like there's this huge conspiracy theory that started happening.
And he kind of told us to, just kind of stopped our lease. He said, you guys are done at the end of this, wouldn't renew our lease. And the day we were to move, or we didn't set up to move fast enough, I guess, and so we moved on the 1st of the month instead of the 30th of the month prior. And when I showed up in the morning to, shut down the studio and everything, he was standing in there. The landlord was standing in the studio and got really aggressive right in my face, and actually he told me, he said, well, let's take this outside.
Now this guy we're talking about is a world champion or Canadian champion kickboxer or something. Like he was like a professional martial artist, like an accomplished one. And so it wouldn't have been a good fight. It would have been entertaining, but Dan was basically like, no.
At that point, I had switched on the microphone, so we were going live to air, and he had, offered to fight me. So I made sure that he understood that we were on air live over the radio, and mentioned how 20 to 30 members of the radio station were coming pretty soon to start the move, and maybe he could just leave without fighting. And he actually backed off after a couple tense minutes of us kind of standing face to face, and just it was a little unnecessary, but we did not leave that place on amicable terms.
So then we moved to my favorite place of all time, King Street, on the top of the driving school. That's why I had lots of guests like Mo Kenny and Kevin Bright and Big Root Jake, and it was a cozy little space, and we designed it with the mosaics on the wall, and I love that place. That was my favorite.
You sit back upon the mezzanine. You got to look in the face of your enemy. If all we've ever done is disagree, all we'll ever do. It's all we'll ever do. It's all we'll ever do. It's all we'll ever do.
It's kind of went in cycles. If we could afford a place, so we got a little better place, and we couldn't afford it anymore.
It's too bad. I look around here and I kind of feel sad that it's gotten to this. I mean, it does. It makes me sad to see this, to see where we were, or where the station was, and where the station is now. And the stories that I've heard about, you know, not being able to keep the phones running, or the third mic here that's not hooked up. I don't even know if they have a tech who's maintaining the tower. I don't know these things, but it would be nice to know. But it's sad to see how it's become.
Yeah. What if I were to tell you, and just your thoughts, that CKMS was thinking of having to move again? So this would be, they moved from the Bauer Warehouse, Maxwell's, Waterloo Street, to Uptown Waterloo, and now having to move again.
First question would be where?
We don't know.
Don't know yet. That's rough.
Are you surprised at all?
I'm not surprised. No, I really think it's going to jump around, and I really think CKMS it's on the decline, or eventually you're going to get enough of the people in there. And I know some of the people still there on the board and stuff like that, and some of them are fantastic and really do work. But it's either going to flop, or you're going to get a good enough team together that start to turn it into a viable business again. And I wish the best for CKMS, I really do.
The King Street Board, one of the things that came up during their time was that CKRZ, which operates on 100.3 FM out of Brantford, they wanted to take the 100.3 that we had in our region, simply because they wanted to expand their coverage. So they proposed the deal of, listen, you give us your 100.3 in Waterloo, and we will give you 102.7 in Waterloo, which a frequency that they owned, but they were not using.
The board considered it on several levels. The main one, or one of the main ones, being friendliness between community radio stations. But the other angle was like on the reconciliation angle. This was an Indigenous radio station serving an Indigenous community, wanted to expand their range and get their voices heard in our community as well. And all the work was going to be done for us. There was really, the only questions that we had were, was this going to hurt us, this transition? Were we going to lose, our market share or whatever? And the board decided at the time, unanimously, that no, we're going to move forward with this project. We don't have really a market share to protect that we won't be able to convince people to listen on whatever new frequency we got to. So we felt this was in the spirit of friendliness, cooperation, and the spirit of reconciliation. It felt like the right thing to do. The board agreed. We brought it to the membership as well, who agreed with the move, and it took a while.
Once we moved, and that board dissolved, the new board came in, and that was when everything came to fruition. So CKRZ contacted us and was like, okay, this is approved now, and it's time to make the change. And it all happened very quickly. CKRZ wanted to move very quickly. We took the opportunity of the frequency change to actually do a bit more rebranding. So we decided to drop Sound FM. We decided to go back to our historical trademark of CKMS and slogan of Radio Waterloo. And so that was a good opportunity realized. And then in addition to that, 102.7 doesn't have a lot of interference on it. So we actually have an increased range. And we learned a lot about the transmission, the government regulations, the government inspectors, how that whole technical part of it works. And that's been extremely valuable, and it's going to be valuable for us going forward as well.
So you got your university degree in engineering.
Yeah.
And then you did not only your undergraduate, but you did your graduate degree.
Yeah.
You must have had quite a love for the radio station to stay with the radio station for all those years instead of going off and doing something else with that.
It was more important to me to be doing something I liked and to be working in an alternative environment than to make the big bucks. What I did was interesting. The people I worked with were interesting. I got to design, build, and install electronic equipment. I got to work as a recording engineer part-time whenever somebody would come through the studio. We had paid sessions in the palindrome as well as the live-to-air things. And I got to meet lots of interesting people who came through and were interested in doing more than just their program, who would get involved in some way in the radio station, and I'd talk to them and get to know them and learn about what they were interested in and what they were getting out of what they were doing. So all in all, as people are wont to say, there's no regrets on my part.
Proud to see every time I turn on the radio, I still hear it and I go, I had my part. My wife had her part. My friends who helped me, help you, help the station, help everyone, do its part. And I hope it's here for another 40 years. It's struggling, but it seems to be this little station just sort of loves to struggle. I don't know.
Is radio dead now? Are newspapers dead? Are there no more books? Does nobody else make theater? Nobody sings, nobody plays instruments anymore? There are no films. There are no pencils, right? Digital is here. Everything changes forever. I don't think so. I think radio in one form or another will be with us. How commercially viable it's going to be, I don't know. Everything is spread so thin these days that it's difficult to make money off doing anything in the media, but I would hope that people still keep doing radio because I think it's a unique medium. It's a very special medium for the people who produce the programs, And it's a very companionable medium for the people who listen. It's a singular experience, much different from television watching in so many ways. I'm a huge fan of radio. I always will be.
The vision of CKMS would just be, it's a community space, it's a space for artists, and it's a space where the best unknown artists come out to play. It should be a destination where if you're coming up as an artist, let's say you're starting as a musician or something, that should be a destination where you want to, you're kind of like, as part of your career, one of your goals is to get on CKMS. And so it should be that kind of platform for local arts. And that's, yeah, I'd say that's the vision. That's the vision.